sounds so old, it's new again.
The Heritage Dancers up here had it going on.
Welcome to Heritage Church. My name is Michael. I'm one of the pastors here. This is Pastor Suzanne. We're glad you're here this morning with us for the beginning of this Love Big series. If you don't mind, before we get started, you got handed an announcement sheet at the door. If you look at the bottom, it says Connect Card. If you don't mind, that folds over and then it just rips right off. So you can just pull that right off this morning and fill that out for us. If you're a guest here today, we especially would love your information. We won't misuse it in any way. We won't stalk you or anything like that. But put down some information, especially name of people that are with you, emails. We'd love to get to know you. We've grown so fast as a church over the last year that it's getting hard to track everybody, and you're all very important to us. So please put that information down every time you come, because that way we know what's going on with you. It's a great way to communicate, and we do follow up on these things. So at the end of the service, you're going to take this and put it in the offering bucket on your way out the door. Our prayer list is maintained online on our online newsletter every week. So if you put your email down, we'll sign you up for that. If you ever want off, just hit unsubscribe and you're out of it. So that's good. So
we do have one addition to our prayer list. Many of you know Lee Christian. Lee Christian has been a member here for a while, and she had knee replacement surgery a couple weeks ago, and she has had some complications with that. She has a blood clot and an infection, is in Huntsville Hospital right now. So if you could be faithful to pray for her, for God to restore her health, that would be great. And we also have a praise. Heritage Church has a new baby. Welcome, Carson Jane. Isn't she beautiful? Mom and Dad are sitting right here. Y'all just kind of wave right there. Don't worry, we won't embarrass you or anything.
We procreated.
Yay! She has her big brother as well, Nate, and this is Robert and Madeline, and we just rejoice with you as baby Carson Jane, which, by the way, BTW, I love that name. Would y'all just give a round of applause as a thank you to Jesus for bringing Carson Jane to us. We're glad that she is with us, and so glad to have the Sextons as part of Heritage Church as well. So we kick off a new series this morning. It's entitled Love Big. And you've ever heard that expression, go big or go home? You know, and the intent is that means to go in and be in, really, really be in with something. And so for us, thinking about this, it's kind of like, love big or go home. I mean, love is something that's a human distinctive. Other species and stuff don't experience love the way that we do. It's something that sets us apart. And all of us understand that we all have a desire to be loved. I mean, who doesn't want to be loved, right? We all want to be loved. And we're wired that way. God has wired us to desire connection, to desire to be loved. But it's also important to understand that God has wired us to love others. A prayer was uttered, this famous prayer, and it said, oh God, grant that I might not seek so much as to be loved and forget what it means to love. And that's our intent in this series, is that we would think about what it means to love big.
And Jesus talked to us about this. Every series we have a series verse that kind of goes with the entire series and encapsulates the message that we're trying to get across. And Jesus talked to us about this. It's actually something Pastor Suzanne covered a couple messages ago. Is one of the verses in there. Somebody asked him, what's the most important commandment? I mean, these are very religious people in his time, and they wanted to know because they had so many, right? They had a pretty robust religious life. And Jesus looked at him and said, listen, it goes like this. He says, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And everybody said, amen, right? Amen. We got to love God. That's the best one out of all of them. They all agreed with him. And then he gave them a bonus plan. He said, the second is like it. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. And in fact, those two are inextricably intertwined. And if you don't do one, you can't do the other right. Both ways. It goes both ways. And he says, listen, all of your religious life, all of the law, all the prophets depend on these two commandments. It is wrapped up in this. If you don't do this, every rule, I don't care if you're the most holy, pious person in the world, if you can't love, you are nothing when it comes to God. Jesus came to reset our capability, our capacity for love. We were made in the image of God. As she said, we were programmed to love, to receive love, but also to give love. And until we get that reset, we can never truly, fully live into the image. Our full humanity doesn't show up. Our full divinity doesn't show up. And you have to have one way. And here's the thing. We love from a place of confidence. I mean, one of Jesus' followers, his name was John, he said it this way. He said, we love because he first loved us. So until you're willing to tap into that greater love, you'll never truly tap into your full potential to love other people. That's why that second commandment is attached to the first. And then John went later to say, if you don't love your neighbors, don't say you love God. They work together. You know, Jesus, became known as the Great Commandments, right? And the Great Commandment just tells us the greatest thing we can do is love big.
So how do we love big? And that's kind of a, we understand we're supposed to love each other, but how do we love big? If we think about love being the greatest force on the planet, I mean, love without question is the greatest force in our world. And when we love big, we have to think about love kind of as a life jacket. Love is something that we put on and it rescues us. Love is our security blanket. It keeps us safe. Love is like oxygen to our souls. It helps us to breathe and to move. And it's kind of like that old saying, don't leave home without it. I mean, love is foundational to who and what we are as people of faith. And an apostle, Peter, he put it this way when he writes to us in a letter in the book of 1 Peter. He says this, and he's talking to believers, and he says, most of all, you see, he's been telling them all these things they should do and all these things about faith and all these things about Jesus and about how we should be. And then he says this, most of all, love each other as if your life depended upon it. Love makes up for practically anything. I mean, what would happen if we could love one another as if our lives depended on it? I mean, you might be a whole lot loving to somebody because if you weren't loving to them, you wouldn't have your life anymore, right? So you love people as if your life depended, because love makes up for practically anything. And in our world, we desperately need for love to make up for practically. I mean, look at our world. Our world is filled with chaos and fear and division and politics and power and money and greed and sin, and we need love because love can make up for practically anything. But it's not just external, it's also internal. You see, a lot of us need love to make up for a few things because somewhere along the way, somebody told us we weren't popular enough, we weren't cool enough, we weren't pretty enough, we weren't smart enough, we weren't thin enough, we weren't rich enough, we weren't good enough. And here's what you need to know. Love makes up for practically anything. You see, the greatest thing we can do is love big.
And don't worry about that baby cry. That's life. We love babies.
We like crying babies. It's all good.
You don't stress about that at all. We love babies. And so how do we learn how to love? How do we get this reset? Well, part of the way we do that is through the stories of Jesus. Amen, little sister. That's it, right? We do this through the stories of Jesus, and Jesus kind of shows, he walks us through. It's one thing to be told, you do this, 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 and this, and preachers are famous for that, right? But then don't live it themselves, But it's another thing to watch someone live it who's a master at it. Right? And that's exactly what Jesus does. He's a master at how to love. And so Jesus in this story is performing a couple of miracles, which is unusual. He's doing two, because normally every little story has, there's like 40 different miracles that Jesus performed in the scriptures that are recorded. He's performed many more that aren't recorded, but 40 that are recorded. And in this little bit of story, this little bit of space, he does two of them. And in fact, he's just coming back from performing another miracle. He cast a demon out of a man who had been plagued with demons his whole life. And he set him free. And he's coming back across the Sea of Galilee. And he sails in, and the scriptures record that thousands of people would clamor for his attention, would come up to him because they all wanted in on the miracle business, right? They all had things that broken that needed fixed. They had all that, or they just wanted to see God at work. It had been so long since a prophet had come to their people, and they were a people of prophets. They were God's people, and it had been so long, and it felt so dry to see that, to know God was at work amongst them, even though the rest of the world was against them and hurting them and subjugating them. To know that was just an amazing thing. And so they just clamored for his attention. And one guy, a VIP, a very important person, showed up, and his name was Jairus. He was the head of the synagogue. And it's like you're at work and you land a big client. You're going to give that client all your attention, right? You're going to be there for that person, because if he lands Jairus, he's got the whole synagogue, right? And so Jairus comes up and does the most amazing thing. He falls down at Jesus' feet and he begs Jesus to come heal his daughter who's dying right in front of everybody. And so Jesus is in, right? I mean, you can't ignore this guy. Just for practical purposes, if nothing else, he needs to win this guy. And so he goes with that man, and the whole crowd comes along with him, and that's where the scriptures start. It says, Jesus went with him, and the large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She'd suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. You know, she didn't feel like she could throw herself at his feet like Jairus, but man, she was going to try anything she could, so she snuck around behind, did an end run, just thinking, if I touch his cloak, maybe I'll be healed. And immediately, her bleeding stopped. And at once, Jesus realized that the power had gone out from him. And he turned around to the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? And that's just such a random question when everybody is touching your clothes, but it's the intent of the person that touched, and that he felt that a healing happened from him without him actually even knowing it was going to happen. And so he turned around, he said, who touched my clothes? And I'm sure his disciples were like, Jairus? This guy his daughter needs healing, she's dying? I mean, he's important, Jesus, we got to land this one, right? And I'm sure everybody's like, come on, we got to go. Forget who touched you. What do you mean? And he's like, no, who touched my clothes? See, real love is focused. Real love always will look for an opportunity to love. We'll always take an advantage of an opportunity to love. Most of us are so distracted in our days, we pass by opportunities left and right. Most of us are stuck on our phone, texting our boss, and our kids sitting there throwing a fit because they need attention. And we're so distracted, we pass by opportunities to love in our own home. I can't even imagine what it's like out in the world where everybody feels they're all on their own all the time. And we're so hung up on what we think is so important. And the most important thing we can do is stop and love that person right where they're at in their need. And we pass by them all the time. But love focuses in on the opportunity to love. It's present for that opportunity. That's how we love big. The greatest thing we can do is love big.
You know what I love about this story when it comes to being able to love big? This story has so many rich things to teach us. And so the story continues. He said, who touched my cloak? And his disciples said to him, look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you ask who touched me?
Exactly.
So he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over. You see, Scripture tells us that she had been suffering for 12 years. Anybody ever been sick? Can you imagine being sick for 12 years and getting no healing? I mean, she had virtually nothing left. As the scripture tells us, she had spent all her money on Middle Eastern medicine, which is crazy things like take ox skulls and mice brains and carry eggs around with you, kind of like witch doctor stuff to make her better. And she is just, so desperate to be healed. But it's not even enough that she's physically sick. You see, in Leviticus 15, if you had this hemorrhage issue that she has, she was declared impure. She was declared unclean. She was considered to be defiled. She was an outcast. So no one had anything to do with her. So you're physically sick. You have no human contact. You've spent all your money on it. She has nothing. But she has just enough faith left. Just enough faith to reach out and to grab his cloak. It's interesting with Jesus is immediately he gives her that healing. He heals her, but he also feels her. He understands what she's been through all these times. You see, all the crowd, when they saw her in this moment where she comes and she fell on her knees, you know what they're saying? Ooh, look at that piece of scum. Look at that piece of scum who touched this healer. What is she doing here? And Jesus, the crowd's quiet because they're like, you're supposed to be over going to heal this little girl. What are you doing? Why are you paused? They're all paying attention. And Jesus stops everybody in these tracks and he looks at this person that they're all looking at with scorn. and condemnation. And he says to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, your suffering over. You know why? Because love is passionate. You see, love understands the suffering of others. Have you ever heard of the passion of Christ? The passion of Christ isn't, woohoo, I'm passionate about, I love you. The passion of Christ is that Jesus was willing to suffer on our behalf. And you need to know that if we're going to love big, we got to be passionate about the fact of understanding that other people suffer, and we got to be willing to sit in the dirt with them and suffer right alongside of them. So Jesus, he goes one further. He heals her, and then he announces to this entire crowd of people, her suffering's over. It's done. It's finished. She's healed. And so we have to ask ourselves, who in our lives is in desperate need of healing? Who in your life needs somebody to speak up for them the way Jesus spoke up for this woman? You see, the greatest thing we can do is love and love big.
And the story goes on. And possibly the worst thing that could happen did happen. While he was still speaking to her, messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, and they told him, your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now. Can you imagine what it's like to be Jairus at this moment? Oh my gosh. Just the questioning of yourself, if only Jesus had gotten here yesterday or sooner. If only the crowd hadn't blocked my way. If only if I gotten to him faster. If only that woman hadn't stopped him. And just now there's nothing we can do. And even my own people are telling me, just leave him alone. He's busy. He's important. He's got other people to heal. He's got things to do. Just let the teacher go. And Jesus wasn't having any of that. I love what he said to him. He said, don't be afraid. Just have faith. See, because here's the deal. Most of us feel that love is like a pie, and when all the slices are gone, we're done. Right? There's no more love for you. And Jesus tells us that love isn't like that at all. Love's like a spring that wells up in us like living water, and it overflows from us. And it isn't until we tap into that love of God that we get this never-ending flow of love within us. And so there's always enough love, Jairus. Don't worry about this. Don't be afraid. Don't fret about this. You don't have to worry, because there's always enough love. It isn't like you think. It isn't like when it's one and done, and you get your chance and you blew it and it's done. There's always enough love for you, because love by its very nature is generous. It gives and gives and gives. It always is willing to go the extra mile. And because of that, we can place our faith in that love. That's why we're supposed to love God first, because once we tap into that, the rest of it just comes in a rush, and it keeps coming and it keeps coming. And our ability to love is expanded exponentially, because it just rises in us like a spring of living water that never ends. That's why we love God first, because we love because he first loved us. And until we understand that love never ends, until we tap directly into that never-ending generous love, we won't understand that we have always more than enough to give. That even though you might think, well, that situation's over, you got more to give. You can go the extra mile. God's making you capable of it. The most important thing we can do is love big.
These stories of the miracles of Jesus, if you've not read them all, it would be a great thing. You could even get on Google and just Google the miracles of Jesus and just sit and read them. I think in some ways in our world we've forgotten that Jesus is the king of the miracle. And those miracles weren't just for the people in the biblical days. Those miracles happen every day in the world around us. We've gotten so cold and calloused, and we miss it. So Jesus arrives there. He went inside and he asked, why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead. She's only asleep. And the crowd laughed at him. But he made them all leave. And he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, "Little girl, get up." And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. They were overwhelmed and totally amazed. When was the last time we were overwhelmed and amazed by God in our lives? And you know, in the story, if you think about it, these in the Middle Eastern times, they had professional mourners. When somebody would die, they had people who would come over, and they were professionals, and they would cry. And these people knew what death looked like. So when they said the little girl was dead, you know, they thought she was dead. So Jesus was really doing a miracle to bring her back. You know, he's noticed she's asleep. And I love what Jesus did. They laughed at him. And so what Jesus said, y'all just need to go on and go, right? He throws them out, right? He throws them out of them and said, y'all need to go. And in the Greek, what it says when he says to her, little girl, get up, the tone of those words are words, they're soft and they're gentle and they're soothing and they're sweet. Kind of like mamas on the first day of school when they go in and they wake, they're like, honey, it's time to get up. It's your first day. You know, it's like that soothing and sweet. And, you know, that's just kind of, you know, kind of how Jesus is. And she was 12 years old. And when she woke up, Jesus, you know, he cares about us on such a human level. You know what he tells her parents? Everybody's overwhelmed and amazed. You know what he says to them? Get her something to eat. Get her something to eat. You see, Jesus cares about every detail of our lives because love is transformative. I mean, I want you to think about this story. Think about this little girl. If she was in our modern times and she went back to school on the first day of school and they said, write about what happened this summer, would she have a story to write about? I died and Jesus brought me back to life, right? I mean, that would be the story that she could write in our lives. And think about her family, about her father and her mother and her relatives and the mourners who were there and the people who were there. You see, love is transformative. It's the greatest force in the world, and it transforms. It's the only thing that can transform the world is the power of love. You see, I know that all of us know somebody who's in desperate need of transformation. You know what it's going to take for them to get there? It's going to take us being willing to love big. See, the greatest thing we can do is love big.
And so, you know, that's what we, the church, are supposed to be engaged in. That's our job in the world. Is Jesus redefines what love is for us, resets our ability and our capability to love, makes us holy in that. And so it's always up to us to take our temperature on that. And we know what love is. We can look, we can see it, we can recognize it. We even see it in these stories. Love is all those things. Love is so much more even. But love is focused, it's passionate, it's generous, and it's transformative. So we know it when we see it. But to take our temperature, we've got to see the contrast of those things, because it'll really let us know where we're sitting and where we need to be. And so we need to talk a little bit about what love isn't. And love isn't distracted. If we are to be the greatest lovers in the world, the greatest purveyors of love, I guess you could say, then we've got to lay down the distractions. This is no longer important. You're important, and you're important, and you're important. That's not important. That's ones and zeros. That TV is no longer important. What I'm mad about is no longer important. What's important is the person in front of me that needs me to love them. What's important is being aware of the situation around me so that I can take advantage of the opportunities that God places in my path. The scripture says he actually does that. He gives you chances to do good work every day. But if we're so distracted, we'll never see it. You know, our attention span's gone down over the last decade from 12 minutes to 5 minutes. I can't even put a YouTube video up over 5 minutes because nobody will click on the daggum thing. No one's going to look at, if you see, I need to ask yourself, you get on YouTube and it's over 5 minutes, you have to do a little mental math. You know, do I have the time to actually invest in that, right? That's our attention span.
Like
We've been wired for that.
Like a goldfish.
Like a goldfish, seriously. I blew a bubble. Ooh, another bubble. You know, that's it. That's our attention span. So we have got to drop the distractions and reset ourselves, reset our clock to be focused on the most important thing and call everything else what it is, a distraction from that. Sometimes they're important distractions, but they're still distractions. And we've got to stop being apathetic. The root word of passion means to suffer. That's what the word means. We can no longer walk by other people's sufferings and act like we don't want to participate in that. Love is suffering in many senses. It's suffering for what you're going through. It's sharing in your suffering. It's walking with you in that pain. It's not pity, it's empathy. It's understanding what you're going through. And we walk by suffering all day long because we've got this idea that love is a pie and I only got so much to give. And I don't have the energy to invest in that right now. And we do it all. And you do that enough, it becomes a lifestyle of apathy. But love isn't a pie. It's a well springing up inside of us. And so we can no longer be stingy with that love. We have to go the extra mile. Jesus tells us to go the extra mile, especially for the people we don't like and that don't like us. Go the extra mile for them. And you just have to take your temperature. Are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Have you been just stuck forever? You might want to really take your own temperature on how much you are willing to engage in what we're called to do, the greatest thing we're called to do, which is love, because that love changes you. It doesn't just change the people you love, it changes you. That's the true mark of holiness, is our capacity and our willingness to love. That's holiness. We think it's keeping clean and pure and all those stuff. No, it's setting apart your life for the work of God, which is love. And the more you love, the holier you become. The opposite's true too. And it changes you. It transforms you as you do it. And you grow more and more capable. It expands your capability to love. Because the greatest thing we can do is love big.
So we go back to the words of Peter. How do we do it? He tells us that we do it as if our lives depended upon it. But here's what is important to note. It's not just that our lives depended on it. Others' lives are dependent on it. Because love makes up for practically anything. We do a lot of beautiful ministries here. We do some prison ministry. We do backpack ministries for kids. We do all kinds of different things. And we wanted to talk to you as a congregation a little bit about what Davidson Farms, what's going on there and what that's going to look like. And so we wanted to do a little bit of that in person so that you could understand a little bit more about this whole love big thing. And so Davidson Farms, if you don't know, if you're a guest here and you just wandered in here this morning, Davidson Farms, you may have seen it in the announcements a few minutes ago. It's going to be a foster home for girls ages 11 through 17. And there'll be a group home. There'll be 10 of them. And Michael and I are going to be the house parents, and we'll be moving there shortly, very shortly, to begin to spend time and to help raise them. And so we wanted to just tell you a few things about that as we get ready to do that. And so one of the things for us to understand is that as a church, when we met and talked a little bit about our vision and what we wanted to do and our values, we said that we wanted to do something to make an impact in the lives of children. We wanted to do something real and tangible as that, and certainly, that is definitely occurring, but this is a big task. And it's not just a task for us, it's a task for the entire church, because they're going to be part of your family too. They're going to be here in our midst, and they're going to desperately need to be loved big as they come here to be with us. And so, for a lot of us, when we think about this, we think, wow, how could we help? What could we do? A lot of people will say to Michael and I, what can we do to help? And I would say that one of the things that you could do to help would be this. Pastors have this interesting line in their job description, and many of you have this line in your job description too. Do y'all know what that line is? Other duties as assigned. Does anybody have that? Pastors have a lot of that. But the truth is there's way more of you than there is of us. And if there was ever a time for the church to step up and be the church so that we can love big, now is the time to do that. And we're not ashamed or embarrassed to say that, we're going to need some help in order for this to be a reality. The average house parent tenure for a group of in a house parent situation, the average tenure is 9 months. And we're going to do everything we can to be above average, but we're definitely going to need some help if we're going to love these girls big.
So one of the ways that you can help, and this goes right into loving generously, and we do this a lot with a lot of different ministries. We just finished doing it with the Salvation Army, getting food for the homeless folks that have dogs, and so we did a great job with that, by the way. That hurt a lot of backs moving that food. So, but one of the things that you can do is you can bring in supplies for the home. This home is a 100% privately funded. Most group homes in the state are funded by the state. This one is not. It is privately funded, and that gives us a lot of advantages as to who we'll take in and how we can create the dynamics in the house for the best for the girls. And also it allows us to bring them to church with us and surround them with a community that will love them in a way they've never been loved before, many of them. And so if you can bring in any of these things on that list, we love it. We'll be doing a collection ministry all month. That's what this list is for. Also, one of the biggest things we could use is gift cards, believe it or not, and that's crazy. But it's like we're starting to realize this now because we're moving our stuff into the house right now, and we're starting to realize there's no way we could cover all the bases with donated items. I mean, we just don't know what we don't know until we get in there. You ever done that? You moved into a house like
there's no trash can.
There's no bags here, And so like there's no toilet paper, which we took care of, thank God.
No, we can have
there's a lot of girls in there. We hadn't need some toilet paper, but the gift cards would be great. If nothing else, if you can't bring anything yet on this, if you can stop at Walmart or Target or something and get a gift card, that will cover a lot of those miscellaneous expenses that are going to come up, and they're going to come up a lot. So please do that. But it's not just about being generous with items and with money.
It's also with your time. There'll be lots of opportunities to serve. Today we're going out there from 1:30 to 4:30. I think that we'll probably finish a little early. I'm praying that we'll finish early. It's a 10,000 square foot house. Contractors have been in it for the last 6 months, and so we're going to kind of do a contractor clean today and get it ready to bring the girls home. But anytime, there'll be other opportunities to serve at Davidson Farms as we move forward. And when there's an opportunity for that, it would be great if we just step up and do that. Don't assume somebody else has got it. Just be the first in line to say, I've got it. Don't make it to where we have to personally text a bunch of people to gather a crew. Just be like, I'm there and I'm in, help us to love big. I heard this saying one time, and I think it's so true in the church. Everybody thought somebody would do it and nobody did it. Has anyone ever had that happen? Everybody, somebody's got that. But everybody thought somebody would do it and nobody would do it. And so we'll certainly need you to save. And then the last thing that we wanted to talk to you about this concept of Davidson Farms and this opportunity that God has seen fit to give our church. What a gift it is. Out of all the churches in Madison County, God chose to send these girls here. It's a gift and a privilege, an opportunity and a responsibility for all of us. So I want to talk about the girls a little bit. We know right now who the first two are. We know who they are. And when I saw their pictures, my heart broke for them. Those little girls have done nothing wrong. None of what has happened to them is their fault. Not one thing. A lot of these girls will come to us. We have applications for even more. We have 4 more applications we're looking at right now. These girls have been hurt. These girls have been abused. They have been wounded. And just like that woman in that story, they're willing to reach their hand out, and they're going to be reaching it out to you to show them just a touch of God's love in our midst. So there's a couple things that we need to think about as a church as they come with us. First of all is the concept of confidentiality. So if Michael and I are at Walmart with them and you're with a friend, you don't point and say, hey, those are those foster kids who would want that? What teenager would want that?
They're not monkeys in a farm.
They're human beings, and they have divine worth and sacred worth. And so when they're here, you treat them like you treat any of our other youth, which is awesome because our youth are wonderful here, but we love on them like we would in anybody else. And so we want to be cognizant of that when it comes to our treatment of them. It's to hear their stories. A lot of times, it's just heartbreaking to hear the things that have happened to a lot of these foster kids. Some of them have had a parent die. Some of them have had parents who are on drugs. Some of them have been abandoned for one reason or another. And I don't tell you that for you to feel pity for them. They don't need you to feel pity. They need you to love them and love them big. For many of these kids, they've never walked through the door of a church. And when they do, you'll be their family. And so being here is important. Being present, being engaged, loving these girls big is so very, very important. I don't think there's ever been a better time for our church, for sure, for us to love big. You know, if you think about that story that we just read this morning, in that story, Jesus shows us how to love big. But I think that Davidson Farms is going to teach us how to love big. So in order to do that, we've got to be focused. We've got to look for opportunities. There's a thing on your next step. You know, what might you have to offer that you could help the girls? So we'll be looking for that. We've got to be willing to be generous with our time and with our resources. We've got to be passionate and understand that these girls have suffered, and we got to be willing to sit in the dirt with them a little bit. Because we know that the transformative power of God's love can restore anything. Scripture tells us this: after you have suffered a while, God himself will restore you. And as a church and as a family and as people, God has given us an enormous opportunity to love big. And the greatest thing we can do as people, the greatest thing we can do for the world, and the greatest thing we can do as a church is to simply love big.